Hi, I'm James Governor, co-founder of RedMonk, the developer-focused industry analyst company. It's DevOps World, and it's 2020, so it must be time for another keynote recorded in someone's kitchen? Maybe not. Maybe it doesn't need to be that way. Because if 2020 has taught us anything, it's we've got to be creative about when we work, how we work, and where we work. This has been an opportunity to rethink all of those processes, organizationally, and frankly, personally. Yeah, it's been a bit of a struggle, but there have been some nice things. Like, why couldn't we just do a keynote outside? It's a beautiful day. So, all around here, in these houses, there are people going about their business. They're working. They're not frontline workers. Obviously, I've got a hospital just down the road, Homerton Hospital. It's a great hospital. There are people there that have very much been on the front line. We've got retailers, retailers opening up again. We've got people in bars now. But what we discovered, actually, is that in some ways, there can be some advantages to working from home. And I think that's we're going to see 2020 as a really stunning year in terms of the long-term changes that it engenders. When we think about the use of things like office space and just how much of what we do is predicated on like us serving the office. Is the office serving us, or are we serving the office? Look at companies that have changed their working practices. Now, it's no surprise that we've just very recently heard from Salesforce.com. We've very recently heard from Google that people are not going to be going back into the office until mid-2021, so July 2021 to Salesforce. Even very traditional companies, Barclays Bank. Barclays says they don't see a return to normality in terms of people in the office. So this is a big change, and it's all sorts of sectors where we're seeing these sorts of conversations go on. Really interesting story of a German automotive company. And they were like, okay, our test infrastructure for software was on-prem. Data sovereignty, data governance. So they had a huge rack of servers in their data center. All their software testing had to be done on-prem. Obviously, a car today, in this era, is frankly a computer on wheels, right? So from that perspective, when everybody in Germany had to go home, literally they couldn't test the software that they were trying to use and build for their cars. So I think it's these sorts of things that have really set me to thinking about the long-term changes and opportunities. Because the future of work is distributed. The future of work is not everybody always having to go into the office. Let's talk a bit about Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley has just been a magnet for talent. It's been a magnet for money. It's where the work gets done. And this great irony is that these companies that have built out these infrastructures for distributed systems, that are talking about Kubernetes and clusters and microservices. We've got companies that are building tools to enable distributed work. Slack is a great example. I'll get to them a bit later. But they're all campus companies. And 8 months ago, 60% of the jobs that you'd see advertised would say must be prepared to relocate to San Francisco. That's just a joke now. If you look at jobs today, it may say must be in the US, but it's not going to say is going to have to relocate anywhere. It's not so long ago we had that lovely family in South Korea. The gentleman, and he's doing his interview on the BBC, and his kid runs in, and then his wife runs in to get the kid. And we all laughed, right? Well, here we are, just a matter of a year and a bit, I think, later, and this is just how we all live now. Everybody has their kids popping up on calls. Everybody has their pets popping up on calls. If the pet comes in, everybody wants to talk to it. And I think this is a sort of, this is a more human way of working, and it can be a more equitable way of working. I want to talk a bit about great keynote at GitHub Universe when one of their engineering directors, Alison McMillan, did a great talk, great demo. And she was showing Microsoft's Code Spaces. So basically, Code Spaces is a great piece of software that's all online, right? So it's an online IDE. They've got great integration with GitHub. So basically, from your repo, you can create the development environment without any act shaving and just bang away on the code straight away. It creates all of the things, it does the build for you. So Ali does his demo, and I thought, you know, this is really cool, but it was the conclusion of that talk that I thought was just so incredible. Because she said, look, I have 2 kids. When I get them down for a nap, I just want to be coding, and I don't want to be messing around. And I thought that was really profound. I mean, how often in the tech industry do we see somebody talking about being a parent, and the difficulties there and challenges there, and how that supports or how that relates to a software product. And I think that was great. That was a great moment, because that to me felt like a real humanization. So Ali's got a podcast called Parent Driven Development, all sorts of great content on there. And let's think about equity. Let's think about going to events. You know, here we are, DevOps World, another event. Normally, obviously, we'd all be in a room together. That'd be nice. It's always great to see everybody. It's a great community, and that would be excellent. But some people are excluded. So if we think about how easy is it for people in wheelchairs to go to tech events, how good is the accessibility at tech events? How good is the accessibility when you go to a meetup? The first thing you want to do is, just go up 2 flights of stairs. And so for people that have accessibility issues, some of the world we're living in now, which is more digital in terms of events, I think is potentially more accessible. Another one is this question, frankly, of visas and transport and different geographies. So, you know, in a previous keynote at this event, I talked a lot about Nigeria. But of course, tech isn't just booming in Nigeria. I could talk about Ghana. I could talk about Kenya. I could talk about Algeria. I could talk about Armenia, where there's a great JavaScript community building. I could talk about the Baltics. I could talk about any number of cities in Europe. Digitization is happening across the board, but not everyone can travel. And certainly for some geographies, it's really hard to get a visa. So there's this, there's a lack of accessibility for the events we're running. And I think what's been very interesting to me over these past few months is watching event after event absolutely smash it in terms of attendance. Because if you can drop in, if you can not have to travel, I mean, you know, suppose you're a single parent. How easy is it to go to tech events and be part of the community and be involved in these learning activities and everything else? It can be really hard. Not everybody is in a position where they can find this easy. So for parents, for less abled, for different geographies, 2020 can play, if we're intentional about it, be a trigger for a more inclusive world of work and a more inclusive industry, frankly. So what that means is thinking about being intentional, thinking about platforms that can enable that kind of work, thinking about the processes. And I say those processes might be being more flexible about when you expect work should be done. Some really interesting data there. If we look at open source communities, some of them have seen a burst of activity, actually. More check-ins, more work, more stuff checked into the repos, more commits on open source projects, because people can work at their own speed. People are working from home. Maybe they're not getting so many interruptions. And I think that's one of the really interesting things about working from home. For some people, sure, you've got families. You know, I've got 3 kids, so interrupt-driven development is definitely part of my life. But, you know, it's about carving out time to work and getting away, as I say, from that Taylorist thing. You anybody that tells you you need to be in the office at this time till that time, they're going to struggle to find people to work for them. And frankly, those are the businesses that have had the biggest challenges, the biggest problems over these last couple of years. So what are the tools we've got? And to me, the interplay, the complex interplay of open source, hacker culture, and the new world of work is super interesting. 1971, Murray Turoff creates a bulletin board system for emergency medical response in the US. How appropriate is that for 2020? This kicks off a lot of the notions of collaboration. That created so many of the foundations of what became hacker culture. Because all the social media stuff we're doing, the Facebook and the Snapchat and the WeChat and all of that stuff, all came out of foundations that were built by, frankly, geeks, software developers, people sharing things. These patterns of sharing things, making jokes, making memes, sharing software, making changes, accepting changes. This stuff all came out of software developer culture. 1983, Radia Pullman at DEC creates the spanning tree protocol. This is going to kick off so much of what has enabled these incredible global networks that we now use and expect on a daily basis. 1988, Jarkko Oikarinen in Finland. He's like, boom, I'm going to create IRC, take those bulletin board systems and really kind of package them up in a way that geeks loved. Geeks loved IRC. So this was sort of transformational in terms of, alongside all of the other activities you were doing, it was a great way of communicating. And people began to think, wait, we could build bots here. We could start creating automations there. And it just was making people more effective. So then we move into like 1991, Linus Torvalds creates Linux. He announces the project. It's going to be a Unix variant. And obviously he did the initial coding. It was like, oh, we're going to have something that can run on Intel. I'm just going to make this Unix. It'll be a small thing. Turns into a global project. Goes absolutely crazy. By 1995, 96, IBM's on board. It's becoming a global phenomenon. Developers from around the world are using Linux. And not just using Linux. The important thing here is contributing to Linux. It is a group project. So 2005, Git, boom. Linus is like, how are we going to do this collaboration? He's always frustrated. How do I manage this distributed network of people? Maybe they do want to go off and build something. Am I going to take that? Am I going to put it in the trunk? Am I going to make that part of the Linux base? And in doing that, he created Git. And obviously Git was a big change in terms of distributed version control. There are alternatives out there, but Git won that war. 2008, Logical Awesome. GitHub comes along, takes those ideas of Git, takes the ideas that Linus had, basically packages them up into a social, into a community platform where people can do work together and basically revolutionize open source in the process, revolutionize software development, and frankly, created this notion of social coding. 2013 and everything is changing again. So what do we have? We have Docker arrives. And I think Docker is super interesting because you could think about it as just making things really easy for developers to work on things on their laptops. But of course, because all the interdependencies were there, it became a shareable artifact. Not just in the context of I build it on the laptop and then deploy it elsewhere, but the idea that I can share those Docker images and have other people working on them and other people taking advantage of them. 2013, let's talk about Slack. So Slack did such a brilliant job of packaging up those ideas, as I said, around like automations and bots, so that you could do, we began to talk about things like chat ops. What if we could like do a command from Slack that was going to make system changes, or we could, basically ask for monitoring information about an application. We could tie operations from a conversational perspective into our observability stack and our metrics. That's like super interesting to me that they just packaged all of these things, and it began explicitly. Slack was absolutely all about how are we going to make developers more effective. Trying to build systems that geeks want to use end up being systems that all kinds of people want to use. What I'm really trying to get at here is this interplay of people, of technology, of culture, of the socio-technical system that is driving us forward. And the fact that it is constantly actually paying itself forward. We learn new patterns and new ways of work, and we implement them in how we live and frankly enjoy and share information. So let's sort of start wrapping this up and thinking about this platform. We've got this data, this incredible data set now about how people are working. You know, we've got the metrics. Are there more check-ins? Is there more documentation being built? Is there better test coverage? These are all things that we can begin to improve on. Let's have one system that enables us to tie in those builds with our feature flags. Infrastructure as code needs to be part of that platform. Make things easy. As the developer is doing something, you can be building all of the environments and all the tests they need and really nailing it down in a way that, frankly, is the production environment. The platform is going to be about Git. Git can be a system of record. You've heard a bit in the last couple of days about GitOps. It's this notion of Git as the system of record. You can't have all your developers just running around SSHing in to spin up a new server and make changes. You need to track changes. You need to know what's going on. You want some compliance on that software delivery process, and that's something that Git and GitOps can give us. Make it declarative. This is what we want, and then let your Kubernetes clusters do the rest of the work. That's something that we're seeing more and more of at the moment. I talked about developing in production, moving away from that old VMware world. So we need to be doing observability. We need to be able to understand the system from its outputs. We can't just be dealing with metrics as it was, because frankly, we don't have time to do that. The need for troubleshooting is just so substantial now. There are opportunities, feature flags, we can roll something out in another geography so that we can understand that system before we roll it out more broadly, perhaps roll it out to a particular constituency of users. I call this progressive delivery. But for me, we need to start bringing all of this stuff together in a platform. And there will be completely new ways to work. And then the bottom line is this. The last 20, 25 years have really been about the rise of distributed systems. The next 20, 25 years are going to be about the rise of distributed work. Software culture is going to help define that. Open source culture is going to help define that. The most successful communities are going to be those that can really work together effectively at scale across geographical boundaries, across boundaries of time and space, being able to be asynchronous in working. I think that's one of the charms, is just finding ways that we can collaborate more effectively, and it isn't, I know one thing, in the office. Hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.